Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, it's all about the propaganda and misinformation war, with two Aryas making our headlines. In India, it's Major Gaurav Arya, that fiery Hindutva mouthpiece, who's now citing Hitler as India's guide to winning the war over Pakistan, among shocking rhetoric designed to fire up his Hindu flock. Meanwhile, another Arya, this time in Canada, and another RSS stooge. It's former MP Chandra Arya, who's showing his true colours after being thrown out of the Liberal Party as he launches a new Hindutva organisation, as if anyone was surprised. Meanwhile, what isn't a surprise is that across the India-Pakistan border, where human suffering has mounted over recent days with the various attacks, it's Sikhs once again at the forefront providing aid and solace to those affected. And the community mourns the passing of Jani Mohan Singh, the former head Granthi of the Harmandir Sahib. Well, all this and more on today's show, but joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and the little redness on the face is lightening up, so I'm not blinding all the viewers out there. But hey, thanks for tuning in once again for another show. We love your comments, keeping it coming in, and don't forget that you can support the channel by following the links in the link tree in the descriptions below. And on that, back to you, Angus.
Indeed. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And as usual, we'll take a look at a few of your comments at the end of the show. So stay tuned for that. Right, James, what are you going to start us off with this morning?
It appears that the truth is out of the bag, or the cat's out of the bag, as they say here in Canada. Chandra Arya has gone ahead and started his own Hindutva organization here in Canada. And it looks as though it was more than just a little smoke. There seems to be fire under the claims that he had that extended relationship with India, with the RSS, and of course with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This has come on the heels of his being rejected and thrown out of the Liberal Party, and then, of course, just not having any traction whatsoever to maintain his position as an MP in Canada. So he is gone from politics, and now will move into a role of taking basically the lead of a new organization that's going to lobby for the Hindu rights in Canada. Now, this has really been a up and down roller coaster ride for him, as he lost all credibility being thrown out of the Liberal Party because of the fact that he had that close ties to Narendra Modi. He made the unofficial and unapproved trip to India during the diplomatic scuffle between Canada and India. And then, of course, there was the foreign interference report that had lots of different names and lots of different evidence in there, but none that was actually publicized about him. However, the CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, did have concerns about him. So it just shows as to that there may have been things that were not said and not released publicly. Maybe they didn't have enough force of evidence behind it to publicly bring it up, but it definitely was a concern. So now he is launching the Hindu Public Affairs Council of Canada, and that again is here in Canada, and he's going to be taking on a lot of different issues when it comes to furthering the Hindu cause in Canada. He claims that there is not enough support, there's not enough representation, and there's not enough outlets for the Hindu community to be heard in Canada. But the real question is this just another way for him to further the RSS agenda here within the confines of the country of Canada? We'll have to wait and see. But as I said, his tenure was marked by a steadfast commitment to elevating Canadian Hindu issues, and that's something that we saw throughout his time in the Canadian Parliament. He also was very much the signature or the lead on the signature movement to achieve having a Hindu Heritage Month in Canada, and that was established in 2022 through a private member's bill. That passed unanimously in the House of Commons, and since then he's of course been raising the saffron flag emblazoned with the OM symbol on Parliament Hill annually, and that's urging Canadians to engage politically and assert their identity. Now, Arya told it says Sutlej, but it was actually another TV outlet. I made a mistake there. My apologies, folks. That actually came from CBC. And but Canada's Hindu community has been unfairly targeted, is what he has claimed. From temple vandalism to threats against safety, they need leaders who unapologetically stand up for that community. And that is just one of the many reasons he's claiming to have started this new organization to lobby on behalf of the community. But again, we'll see how that plays out, Angus, because I think that it is just another way for him to allow the BJP, the RSS, and other Hindutva organizations and entities to have another foothold in Canada while hiding behind his experience as an MP. Of course, we need to also keep an eye on how much he ties in with other politicians, whether in office as liberals or as like he was basically accused of being involved with different activities, which really included several members of the Conservative Party as well. So it wasn't just the Liberal Party that was at question. It was the other parties in addition to himself. So again, when we bring up the trip to India, that was an unauthorized trip, and it was really looked down upon by Global Affairs Canada because of the fact that it was such a public rift between us and India, and the fact that they were unleashing the media machine and the propaganda machine against politicians in Canada, including the Prime Minister at the time, Justin Trudeau. So as we watch this, we'll have to keep a close eye on what his agenda is. I think that we already know it, and I think that it really goes to prove or solidify the claim that he did have that real involvement with the India government. Now, he is declaring that it is small donations of the Hindu community in Canada that's funding this organization. However, there are questions as to whether or not there is actually dark funding that's coming in under the radar from India to help support this organization and to make the HPAC go further. So we'll have to watch that closely, and we'll keep everybody up on any updates as we learn them, Angus, but we will be watching this with bated breath to see where it takes us down what rabbit holes.
Yes, indeed. And it's quite an interesting story about this gentleman because ultimately the Hindu population in Canada does need representation. It is marginally smaller, I believe, than the Sikh diaspora in Canada. And of course, the Hindu local population does need a democratic voice. It does need people representing them. The problem then does come is how they are representative. And unfortunately, I believe this guy is just not a very good representative of the community because, of course, he carries with him a very clear agenda. Right. He is not representing the normal average Hindu in Canada. He's representing a very different, very divisive, very extremist agenda, that of the RSS. There's no doubt that he is essentially another mouthpiece of Hindutva. His close ties to Narendra Modi really evidence that, amongst many other things, and the fact that he's been thrown out of the Liberal Party under guidance and no doubt from information gleaned from CSIS. So clearly there is something going on behind the scenes. So this guy is really not a good representative for the good Hindus of Canada. It's as simple as that. And one only needs to look at the sort of language he uses all the time. He always talks about Khalistani extremism. He talks about these attacks on the Hindu mandirs. I mean, what attacks? There was protest. There was some very cherry-picked pieces of video, which did indeed show some Sikhs losing their temper, but only after being severely provoked by an RSS mob. In other words, he's very cleverly playing the propaganda game. He's playing the same whole game that RSS and Hindutva play right across the diaspora. He is essentially just another tool of Hindutva. And that, unfortunately, is a problem. The language he uses is extremely divisive. It reflects the divisive language of Hindutva and of Narendra Modi himself. So he is just a mirror image of Narendra Modi, but just on a local scale in Canada. So it's not surprising, firstly, that the Liberal Party threw him out. And secondly, it's not surprising, and are we surprised, up he pops with a new Hindutva organisation. Of course, across North America, we've got all sorts of these Hindu organisations which on the face of it appear benign. They appear to genuinely represent the local Hindu population, as indeed many of the Sikh organisations do in the same manner. But where it differs is, unfortunately, it carries with it the Hindutva agenda. It has a subtext. There is always this hidden agenda with organisations like this, and this is to promote Hindu nationalism, Hindu extremism, Hindu superiority. And that's unfortunately where it all falls down, because ultimately what he stands for is the superiority of Hindutva, of the Hindu people, which is not really what the genuine Hindu people are about. They are very similar to Sikhs in the sense that they want to treat their fellow human beings equally and peacefully. Unfortunately, Hindutva does not do that. It takes it to its extreme, where it sees itself as superior, hence the Hindu Rashtra, this desire to create a Hindu nation to the exclusion of everybody else. And that, unfortunately, is what this guy represents. And that is really why he's been thrown out of mainstream politics, and he's out in the wilderness where he deserves, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And let's not forget that he was actually described, it wasn't just kicking him out of the Liberal Party, but the party came forward with their leadership saying that he was, and I quote, manifestly unfit for leadership. So again, a very telling statement, I think, about his role in the foreign interference and how the Liberal Party leadership viewed him after the last 4 years of his tenure as an MP. So I think that really plays into the reality that he did have a lot of connections there that he was utilizing and tried to distance himself from unsuccessfully, Angus. So with that, though, let's take a look at someone who is a very powerful and very driven, compassionate person that the Sikh community is now mourning. And that would be the leader of, one-time leader of the Golden Temple. Over this past few days, the entire community, both in India and around the globe, has been mourning the loss. And we'll take a look at this and why it is such a loss of Gianni Mohan Singh. And again, he was the head of the Granthi of Sri Harmandir Sahib. And this is, again, the Golden Temple. And he passed away on May the 10th. His demise marks the end of an era for the Sikh community, which cherished him as a spiritual luminary, a steadfast guardian of Sikh tradition, and a humble servant of the Guru Gar. Tributes from across Punjab and the global Sikh diaspora, including heartfelt messages from prominent figures and posts on X, reflects the immense respect he commanded. As the Sikh community grieves, they reflect on his life, his contributions to Sikhi, and of course his enduring legacy that will live on for generations to come. Now, taking a look at his earlier years, Gianni Mohan Singh was born to a devout Sikh family in the Punjab, where his early years were shaped by a deep connection to the Gurbani and the teaching of the Sikh gurus. His scholarly aptitude and spiritual devotion became evident early, leading him to immerse himself in the study of the Sikh sculptures, history, and traditions. Trained on the rigorous discipline of Sikh theology, he earned the title Giani, a term denoting profound knowledge of Sikh scriptures, and that is particularly accountable to the Guru Granth Sahib. Now, as this story goes on, I've actually gone through quite a bit of his background and researched quite a bit here, so I'm not going to read it all in the interest of time of our show, but I wanted to point out some of the real important influences that he had. As the head Granthi, the Gianni Mohan Singh played, he had a pivotal role in preserving and promoting the sacred traditions of the Golden Temple, but also he did things outside of his role at the temple as well. He really tried to lead the future of Sikhi and of the community. He tried to act as a role model and a teacher to the younger generation. He took it upon himself himself to try to guide them into the sacred parts of Sikhi, to make sure that they really reinforced the principles of humility, seva, and simran. And that, again, was such an important part of the life that he led, and he really wanted to make sure that that legacy lived on in the future of those youth. Now, he also had a tenure that coincided with significant moments in Sikh history, including efforts to strengthen the SGPC, the body responsible for managing Sikh Gurdwaras. He supported initiatives to modernize Gurdwara administration while safeguarding their spiritual sanctity, reflecting the balance between tradition and progress that defined his leadership. And that is, again, something that you see within the older generations versus the newer generations, is that gap between the technology, between the modernization of different parts of religion. And I'm talking generalized religion here across the board, is that you find that sometimes they are left behind. They don't adapt, they don't modernize, and therefore they lose that connection with the next generation. And I think that's what's happening with some of the churches around the world and the different religions, is that they haven't adapted, and therefore they've lost that sacred connection with the youth to really instill the values that they teach. But this is not the case in terms of the Gurdwaras and the progress that he made in trying to find that fine balance between modernization and the tradition. So I think that also will play a big role in his legacy. Now, of course, he also had so many other roles in uniting the Sikhs around the world, not just in spiritual guidance, but also in terms of their work to help others, whether it is issues such as the war in Ukraine, when the Sikhs lined up at the border in Poland with open arms. They fed, they clothed, they helped the people to find places to rest and be, and basically know that they were safe. They made it to the other side of the border outside of Ukraine. And what a welcoming gift that was by the Sikh community to be there. And I think that that is another one of his legacies, is that Gianni Mohan Singh is going to be known for his compassion, for his protection of that sacred value of Sikhi, but also to bring it forward to the future generations through his ability to connect with the younger crowd. And let's face it, we are getting older, Angus. We are getting up in our years in terms of being able to relate or seen as relatable by the young generation. For him to do that at his age is a very powerful testament to his ability to communicate with others and to be a strong leader, Angus.
Yes, indeed. And one thing I would say is that this term mourning is bandied around quite casually and too often almost with situations and people like this. And in fact, of course, one of the great things I believe about Sikhi is this whole concept of we don't mourn. When somebody passes away, we don't mourn them, we celebrate them. We celebrate their life. We also celebrate the fact that they are moving to the next phase of this great cycle of life and death, etc. So, of course, overt mourning and wailing, as certainly some religions are quite prone to do, it does not exist in Sikhi. Yeah. Sikh is a little bit more dignified and a little bit more celebratory about the cycle of life, which to me is a very great way of dealing with situations like this. But yeah, this gentleman, I mean, what a legacy, what a life. I mean, clearly he was one of these rare individuals and really important individuals in any religion who have the ability to translate the Holy Scriptures to the layman audience, to people who really would get otherwise turned off and turned away from Holy Scriptures. Because, of course, Holy Scriptures were written a very long time ago, and they tend to be a little bit dry, a little bit very dignified, very formal. And, of course, it does tend to turn the younger generation away because they think, I can't relate to that. But he's one of those guys who clearly had this ability to form that interface, to be that very powerful translator, effectively, of the Holy Scriptures, the Guru Granthi Sahib Ji, to the younger generation, explain how it relates, how it is relevant to their everyday lives. And that was a really significant talent, really a God-given talent, and which is why he was so revered and why indeed he rose to such a senior position in the Sikh church. So yeah, it is very sad, obviously, to lose him. He had this a huge ability. He formed that interface, this intergenerational interface, where he could pass down. And again, this is where many religions are failing, particularly in the modern era, and Christianity is a prime example of this, where in fact, ironically, in Christianity, many new churches are springing up that are very, very different and very far removed from the old dinosaur churches, let's call it, that follow the old traditional, very old-fashioned way of being very dignified, very formal.
That's right.
But again, that's turned off the young. The young have ended up setting up their own churches, their own fragmented divisions of Christianity. And Sikhi is obviously trying to avoid this, and it's people like this who succeeds in this by, again, passing down the learning from the older generations and constantly evolving Sikhi to make it relevant and constantly relevant for the young generation, so that they are not alienated. They don't see it as, oh, it's just those old people doing those old-fashioned things. He had this ability, like many before him, to keep evolving Sikhi, keep making the message relevant and modernising it as every generation comes, modernising it for each new generation, so it survives, it exists, and it succeeds, James. So yeah, a great gentleman by all accounts.
Absolutely. So in closing there, I just want to say that the last two paragraphs here touched just on what you said there, Angus, is that Jiona Mohan Singh, his life was a testament to the enduring power of Sikhism's teachings. His voice, which once echoed through the sanctum of the Golden Temple, will continue to inspire through the memories he leaves behind. For the millions who heard him recite Gurbani or sought his counsel, he was more than a Granthi. He was a spiritual anchor, a keeper of faith, and a symbol of the Khalsa's resilience. As the Sikh community mourns, it also celebrates a life well lived in the service of Guru Jiona Mohan Singh's legacy will ensure in the hearts of devotees, in the sacred verses of the Guru Granth Sahib, and in the timeless sanctity of Sri Harmandir Sahib, and the pant prays for his soul to rest in eternal peace, forever united with the Waheguru.
Indeed, powerful words, James. So yes, that's an interesting story. Let's move on, James, then to my first story, and we're going to go back to the name of Arya. Yes, indeed. Well, I would say on the Sikh community, we have on our side we have people like Gurprathan Singh Panoon, let's call him our volcanic firebrand, who's always spitting powerful rhetoric to promote the community. Well, on the Hindutva side, they of course have Major Gaurav Arya, this gentleman who really is never afraid of pushing his agenda and pushing the Hindutva agenda in his own inimitable way. And of course, we've talked about him on regular occasions. But what he really is effective at is this information war, or should I say the misinformation and disinformation war. And notwithstanding, of course, the recent attacks of India on Pakistan, he, of course, has been right at the forefront. He has a huge following on Twitter, on X, literally millions of followers, presumably mostly in India itself. So, of course, he's a very influential figure. What he says is heard by a lot of people, and his opinions are therefore influencing the opinions of literally millions of people. So what he says matters. Now, in this misinformation war, I did report yesterday something that I found actually extremely concerning. Was X itself announced the fact that over 8,000 accounts, X accounts, had been blocked in India, particularly as the situation increased in intensity between the two nations. Is that India immediately slapped executive orders on X to forcing them to block many accounts. Influential accounts, but also some mainstream news accounts. These are not controversial organisations. These are mainstream news outlets that were blocked from broadcasting or being able to be seen within India. X itself said it was basically an egregious and outrageous loss of free speech. I mean, something that we take for granted here in the West. And what was even more interesting was the fact that X is legally not allowed to challenge. It is not allowed to legally challenge these orders in India. And what it's had to do is to appeal to the individuals involved and the organisations involved to let them say, look, we are not allowed to appeal this blocking, which in itself is just flies in the face of democratic rule of law. Everybody has a right to challenge anything in court, in any normal democracy, particularly where their freedom of speech is restricted. But X is not allowed to in India. So X has appealed to the individuals involved, saying, look, it is up to you in India to go to court to demand your freedom of speech. So all this has demonstrated the fact that India has clamped down. India is playing its same old game where it claims to be a democracy, it claims to have freedom of speech, but it very clearly does not. And instead, it ensures that its own narrative is the only narrative that prevails. And of course, it then relies on people like Major Arya to spread out, to spread forth, to influence its audience about that one single narrative. There can only be one narrative that exists. So, Major Arya, who actually, interestingly, is also followed by Narendra Modi on Twitter, on X. So indeed, I think that endorses and validates everything that we've been saying, is that he indeed is effectively a mouthpiece of Narendra Modi and by extension the RSS and Hindutva. So his latest outrage, which has really caused a bit of a firestorm, if you excuse the pun, you'll understand the pun in a moment. He's caused an absolute firestorm by claiming that India's disinformation or misinformation should follow is a deliberate policy of the BJP government and of course the RSS, and he is saying that it should follow the actions and the operations of Goebbels in the Second World War and ultimately of Adolf Hitler. And again, any use of Adolf Hitler in any argument always sort of raises eyebrows because it is used far too often, to be honest, as a comparison. But ultimately, this is Major Arya actually claiming that the Indian government is justified in its use of propaganda and its use of control of the media because that is a tactic that Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels used, and indeed he therefore believes that Narendra Modi and the BJP should follow that same example. They feel they are justified. Unsurprisingly, this has caused an absolute huge backlash across the world, really, but of course from our own quarter in the Sikh community, who of course raised this up. And they've held up Major Arya as almost this clownish figure. The words used by the Sikh Press Association is, in fact, he is a clownish, hysterical figure who actually spreads this fake news, which does unfortunately go viral. And as things did kick off with Pakistan, he was extremely vocal about this, and some of his posts were really inflammatory, really inciting, and really provoking the situation. But of course, he is seen, certainly from this side, as a figure of fun, almost. But, as I say, he's extremely influential. And you only need to look at some of the posts, and I'm showing you some of the posts here that he posted just literally in the last few days when tensions were really ramping up. The world was holding its breath, and that massive diplomatic operation was underway behind the scenes to try and bring these two nations back from the brink of not just all-out war, but a potential nuclear war, because of course both are armed with nuclear weapons. Here's Major Arya actually saying escalate. In other words, let's really escalate this, and following it up with punitive, disproportionate, visible. These must be the criteria of any military retaliation against Pakistan. They must know they're being punished. The punishment must be much, much bigger than the crime. Basically, he is inciting. He is saying that we really must throw everything at Pakistan. We must launch full-scale war. This isn't the language, really, of what a nation should be being represented as. A nation should be diplomatic. Nations should never, unless absolutely provoked, must never try and incite war. We as a human species must always avoid war at all costs. Yet here is this guy saying that no, we must start launching missiles, nuclear weapons even, at our neighbour Pakistan. Now, I'm going to show you a quick video of this is Major Arya just recently talking about Adolf Hitler, but this is in a different context. Now, I just want to highlight the fact of how Hippocratic Arya is, because, of course, he recognises the evil that Hitler is. And here, this is him talking about Hitler, but in the context of France. And, of course, don't forget, he's very right-wing. He's a right-wing extremist, is Major Arya. So he's very anti-immigration, and he's picked up on the story in France, where France has a deeply problematic immigration issue, where the immigrants are really causing a real issue and a real problem in France. But these are his words about that situation in France.
What if somebody who says that Adolf Hitler is my hero and he comes to power in France or any other European country? It will be the mother of all tragedies for this world. But this is exactly where these immigrants who are writing and pushing and, doing things which are against French values.
Okay, so basically, his words there, that's just a short segment, but he is saying it would be the mother of all tragedies to let another Hitler figure effectively take control. Yet, what is happening in his own nation? Now, I wouldn't compare Narendra Modi to Hitler. Of course, that is too extreme. But ultimately, many of the tactics that Narendra Modi is using reflect the tactics of the Nazi Party. The RSS itself was rooted in the causes, in the same fundamental philosophies of Nazism. So therefore, and indeed Arya just now recently saying we should follow the tactics of Adolf Hitler. So you can see the hypocrisy there. And I'm going to finish the segment by showing a fascinating video. Thank you to one of our correspondents. You know who you are. Thanks for bringing this to my attention. This is a speech by Imran Khan in 2019. He was addressing the United Nations General Assembly. This is a fabulous speech, a very powerful speech. Listen to basically what Imran Khan says. I have a lot of time for Imran Khan. He's had his own political troubles, to put it mildly. But this is what he said to the United Nations General Assembly just a few years ago.
What is RSS? RSS, Mr. Narendra Modi is a life member of RSS. RSS was an organization that was inspired by Adolf Hitler and Mussolini, came about in 1925. They believed in racial purity, racial superiority. They also believed they were an Aryan race, like the Nazi believed they were an Aryan race. All that I'm saying can be verified. This is the time of information revolution. You can Google all this, what I'm saying. But it is very important for me to explain this to you so you know what is happening in India. This RSS believed in the ethnic cleansing of Muslims from India. At one point, there was racial superiority of the Hindu race. Secondly, it was hatred for the Muslims and for the Christians, because they believed that this golden age of Hindu civilization was stopped because of Muslim rule centuries back and then the British rule of India. So it was racial superiority and hatred for Muslims and Christians. This is openly stated. You look at the founding fathers of RSS, Golwalkar and Savarkar. Just Google them and you'll find out. And this ideology of hate is what murdered the great Mahatma Gandhi in 1948. It was this ideology of hate that made Narendra Modi in 2002 do a pogrom against Muslims in Gujarat when he was the chief minister. He allowed 3 days for these RSS goons who were inspired by the Hitler brown shirts. They actually wear brown shirts. This RSS, the Congress Home Minister gave a statement that in RSS camps, terrorists are being trained. And these terrorists butchered 2,000 Muslims, and 150,000 Muslims were made homeless. Narendra Modi could not travel to the US because of that. And I need to make you understand this background before I explain to you that what sort of a mind,
etc. And he goes on. But I couldn't put it better myself. This is no conspiracy. This is as set out by Imran Khan himself in front of the United Nations. Clearly, there is this parallel between Hitler's Nazi party and the RSS. They're, as I say, they're rooted in the same philosophies. They're rooted in the same era. That's what it's all about, James. So when Major Arya is talking about Adolf Hitler, I think really the agenda is very clear.
Absolutely. When you have any type of leadership or even just any type of break-off group or even subgroup declaring that there is some type of race superiority or religious superiority, then you know that that whole region is in trouble and it needs a real reset, Angus. And I think that's what we're going to see in India is a reset. And hopefully that includes the breakaway of certain parts of India to give some sovereignty to Khalistan, to Kashmir, and other regions as well. So we'll have to watch and see how that plays out. But very dangerous rhetoric that comes out when they start, basically behaving like a Hitler. And it needs to be called out.
Indeed. The ideology of hate, as Imran Khan described it so eloquently, and
right.
He's absolutely bang on. Right. Clearly, and this is why the Sikh community have become such an enemy of RSS, such a target of the RSS, because they, although Imran Khan talked primarily about Muslims and Christians, it is primarily the Sikh community that have stood up to call out this injustice, to call out the Brahmins and the RSS ideology and this extremist agenda. And it is the Sikh community that forms this existential threat because they are the only ones who are actually standing up and calling it out, notwithstanding Imran Khan likewise. But as the Sikh community,
right.
as a community as a whole that is calling it out, which is why they have become such a target and such an enemy of the RSS and why they are so persecuted accordingly. So, but ultimately justice and equality will always prevail, as it always does. So. Right, James, let's move on to my second story. And let's turn on something a little bit more of a positive spin, a positive angle on what's been going on in recent events. And of course, one of the wonderful philosophies of Sikhi is, of course, this selfless service. Seva, as it's known. Seva manifests itself across the whole platform of Sikhi, wherever it happens to be, whether it's in the diaspora, whether it's helping the homeless and charitable events here in the diaspora, or whether it's even on the ground in India, Pakistan, or indeed Kashmir. And of course, Kashmir, very much in the headlines, with a lot of people being directly affected, unfortunately, a loss of life as missiles and weaponry has been lobbed back and forth over that line of control. And of course, many people, certainly on the ground and locally, are suffering. Well, unsurprisingly, the Sikh community have stepped up once again in their seva, in their selfless service, to provide aid and help the people on the ground. And there's a wonderful article that's been released over the last couple of days, just giving a little bit more information, a little bit more detail about what's actually happening on the ground. Of course, always very difficult to get the truth out of the region. And the Sikh community has been wonderful, been very clever in this, in that it has set up a network of verifiable information to get genuine truth from the ground back out into the West. Because, of course, India is closing the lid on anything. India controls any truth coming out of the region. So, of course, the Sikh community have set up this network, this information network, to ensure that information can come out of the area, the local area, and it can be verified as truth. So fortunately, we can report when we come across it. We can report on truthful events going on the ground. But of course, what has been reported is this seva going on the ground. And this article says, on the morning of 10th of May, a few days ago, Amarjit Singh, an activist and a volunteer with the Gurdwara Chevi Patshahi Committee, this is in the North Kashmir Baramulla area, he left for Nambla village, located near this controversial line of control, where cross-firing was on for the past several consecutive nights. So, of course, despite the ceasefire, of course, there are still small arms fire going across the line of control. Within an hour, the Sikh youth evacuated a family of 6, brought them back to Baramulla town, where he put them up in his own house, unsure when the family would be able to return to their home. Now, Amarjit's effort was part of a collective initiative started by the local Gurdwara, a local committee formed by the Sikh community living across Baramulla to provide safe spaces, medical help and food in the form of langar to help people from these border areas. So once again, langar again, this wonderful concept of Sikhi again manifesting itself on the ground. So the Gurdwara Chevi Pache Committee is one of the only few groups in the border areas working together to rescue the people stranded in villages. Their effort, according to Amanjeet, is to provide extra support to the authorities and to lead people to safety. So once again, Sikh community stepping up on the ground where their help is needed most. Now, the rescue operation began on the 7th of May, and since then the volunteers have rescued at least 150 families. The committees formed a helpline, and based on the calls they received, they immediately deploy volunteers to reach out to families stuck. And the committee has opened all the rooms and given spaces to these families in their own homes to stay for as long as the escalations continue. And like Amanjeet, other volunteers have also opened their homes for the people who need shelter and accommodation. Now, around 220 kilometres away from Baramulla is Poonch, and this is the area that has suffered a lot of shelling. And of course, this is where the Gurdwara received a direct hit. Fortunately, not many people inside, but unfortunately, I think there were 3 or 4 deaths around this Gurdwara. And many people have, of course, in that area remained stuck in their homes and community bunkers. And under the radar grassroots effort has then swung into action. So, of course, again, the Sikh community have stepped up and gone to Poonch to help these people. Now, these small local groups operate without any government grants or social media presence. The Sarimastan Foundation has created a hyper-local and efficient network of over 200 volunteers, mostly from the Gujar Bakawal community. The volunteers, they're drivers, they're farmers, watchmen, teachmen, they're just ordinary people from the Sikh community. They've divided their work across the region's villages and panchayats. And with 2 ambulances at their disposal, the foundation rented 10 auto rickshaws and pooled personal vehicles of its members to facilitate continuous round-the-clock evacuations. And as one of their spokespeople said, this operation doesn't stop. Our volunteers are out rescuing people day and night. We don't sleep, we don't wait. Now, of course, while most of the rescued are Muslim families from the Gujar and Bakawal communities, the foundation has also helped with travel for Sikh and Hindu labourers. So again, they don't care who they're helping. It doesn't matter what their ethnicity or the religious background. They just help anybody who needs help. And it's provided all free of cost. The tradition in Poonch, as they say, has always been one of self-reliance. We don't wait for help, we provide it, they say. So I think as just a localised microcosm example of what Sikhi is all about, here it is writ large, James. This is the local Sikh community who have suddenly stepped up in a time of crisis, a time of trouble where so many families have been directly impacted, even just to the extent of either being made homeless or fearful of staying in their own homes. The Sikh community have stepped up. They're not paid. They're not looking for recognition. They have no social media presence. This is about them locally expressing their savour, their selfless service to their local communities, finding out those who are in need, going out there at their own cost, their own inconvenience, and going out there to help them, even to the extent of opening up their own homes to house and accommodate and provide sanctuary to those in need, James. I think this, in its small scale, its microcosmic scale, really just represents what Sikhi is all about. It is all about selfless service. It is all about helping their fellow human beings, James.
Absolutely, Angus. I touched on that earlier, just the amazing amount of goodness that comes out of the community. And we've seen it around the globe. It's just amazing that the first thought that they have is, how do we get there? How do we bring the help they need? It's not, what is the risk to me? It's not, what is the impact on my life? It is instead, how can I help? How can I get things that you need? What do you need? Where do you need me to be? And that is just something that you have to have nothing but the highest level of respect for the Sikh community when they act like that.
And it's no coincidence, as we often find out, James, that wherever there is a national or an international disaster, a natural disaster, whether it's fire, earthquake, flood or whatever, you will always find the Sikh community there in force. You will always find these Sikh charitable, the large organisations, they are there out in force. But here, even on a local scale, this is how deeply rooted in their communal philosophy is that savour, this helping their fellow human beings, is there. It is just so ingrained. They cannot help themselves. They are out there immediately helping their fellow human beings. So well done to those on the ground out there in Kashmir. So, right, James, let's move on to our comments column. And I did, at the end of last week, I did a Satellite TV special. We didn't have a normal podcast last week. Instead, I did a special based on this story of course, the rising tensions between India and Pakistan. But I did this special program where we looked in a bit more detail about this concept of this DMZ, this demilitarized zone, as a possible long-term solution. And of course, I would also point you to a podcast, an interview that I did, in fact, last night with Congressman Trent Franks, a long-time friend of Satellite TV. He's also a board member of the Khalistan Caucus Foundation, a very vocal supporter of the Sikh community. He's a congressman in the United States. I interviewed him about this very same topic. Hopefully that will be released either today or tomorrow. We'll upload that, so keep an eye out for that, where we discuss this very same topic in more detail. But yeah, we had a lot of reaction, and I would say almost a lot of predictable reaction to that program. TC, as obviously one of our regular viewers and commenters, TC says about this, the Khalistan demilitarization zone, the DMZ, really is the only effective solution to avert what you call this nuclear hell. And Stay Safe responded in the same lines. I was thinking exactly the same. And you go as far as to say, look, we actually need UN peacekeepers and UN protection, duty of the holiest sites of worship during conflict, turbulence, etc. And obviously you don't want a repeat of what happened in 1984 in Operation Blue Star. Amritsar and Nankana Sahib in these skirmishes are hugely targeted. They are under stress, and of course they provide a huge amount of stress to the Sikh community. They fear what could potentially happen. So you're actually even calling for the UN to get involved in this. And then TC then does follow up in a little bit more detail by saying, yeah, absolutely, the DMZ is a long-term solution. But what you say is that is who we're up against. These people who we're up against, they are majority bullying a minority. And ultimately, yes, of course, the Sikhs are the minority who are being bullied, but also Pakistan to some degree, which is, numerically speaking, a much smaller nation. Militarily speaking, it has actually a much smaller military. So it is India being the aggressor here. And are we surprised, of course, by what they represent, what India represents? It is not surprised that they are seen as a bully. And of course, they openly held terrorism as self-defense. So their attack on Pakistan, they're claiming, is a self-defense against what, as you rightly say, TC, etc., etc. So, and as you wrap up that comment, going nuclear doesn't affect just the local community, it obviously affects the whole world. A nuclear attack between these two nations, of course, does have fallout in literal terms, not just metaphorical, across the whole world, James. So yeah, James, I think our commenters here really aligned, I think, with this concept of a DMZ, a demilitarized zone.
I think it's a great idea, and I think that it could definitely be a huge benefit to the entire region to have the DMZ or the DMZ within that. And I think that Khalistan is the prime buffer zone, Angus, as we've talked about last night, to give that buffer zone between the two nations to really, not only in terms of the space, but I think the leadership as well. And I think that gets overlooked. When we talk about demilitarized zones, when we talk about buffer zones, when we talk about just these different areas, we have to look at what is the purpose, but also what benefit can they have beyond just the geographical spacing. That's where I think that the Sikh community and Khalistan can really bring forward a lot of concepts and a lot of examples to the rest of the world in how things can be run properly, but also how that can really play as an instrument of peace.
Indeed, and we talked last night with Congressman Franks about how this situation should evolve. Of course, establishing a DMZ like was established in the 1950s in Korea, which has worked so successfully. The problem, as Congressman Franks pointed out, was, okay, it keeps the peace, but it doesn't solve the longer term solution. You've got two deeply divided nations who are really never going to resolve their differences, and that is what we have here with Pakistan and India. So, of course, a DMZ can be patrolled, as Stay Safe says here. It can be indeed patrolled by the United Nations. You can send UN peacekeepers to patrol that boundary region, but is it really a practical long-term solution? It is, of course, expensive. Is it effective? Yes, it keeps their peace, but it doesn't really solve the long-term issue. So, of course, then it does evolve into, well, why not then expand the DMZ into a wider geographical area, of course, that being of Khalistan, not managed by the United Nations, but indeed managed by the Sikh population. Of course, it becomes the Sikh nation, the Sikh sovereign nation, where, of course, it will be open to people of all backgrounds, religions, ethnicities, and, of course, it will form that peaceful strip of land between those two nations where people can pass freely backwards and forwards except military. And it will not just keep the peace, but it then forms the long-term permanent solution, James. I think that's something the United Nations itself, with soldiers on the ground, UN soldiers on the ground, can't provide, but Khalistan and the Sikh population can. That's the crucial difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, I think that it could definitely work as a model for the rest of the world as well, not just that region within the Punjab and buffering between India and Pakistan. But as I said, it could work for other regions of the world that have that territorial disputes as well.
Indeed. And the next set of comments really follow the same sort of lines. Humanity says, it is the most logical and timely solution. It will settle permanently a number of long-standing issues that have plagued the entire region. It's something the world nations must try and convince India to agree with. And I think the key here is, yes, of course, Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, that whole sort of area of northwestern India. These are problems that are just not going to go away. They will never go away. The divisions are too deep. Effectively, you're pitting the Hindu extremism against the Muslims. And ultimately, they're never going to see eye to eye because their whole cultural identity are so polarized, they are so far apart that there will never be bridges between the two. And ultimately, even 500,000 Indian troops are not solving this. So ultimately, as humanity says, it's something that the world nations must try and convince India to agree with. So this whole concept of a DMZ as a stepping stone towards this Khalistan nation, this buffer zone down that whole strip, that whole border region. Ultimately, it's up to the world, the G20, for example. It's up to the world leaders to impose this upon India and Pakistan, because ultimately India and Pakistan probably won't agree to it themselves. But if it is imposed upon them by the rest of the world, saying, look, you agree to it or else we will isolate you, I think, James, that is the only way it's going to happen. It's got to come from external influence, whether it's the US, Europe or whatever. It's got to come from outside.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not an ocean, but we know that Trump likes to change names on maps. So maybe that works to the benefit.
Indeed, which actually follows very conveniently into Harjinder Baraj's comment. What is history? History is geography on wheels. This is absolutely beautifully put. You're absolutely right. In other words, your point is, look, history just proves that lines on a map are just human constructs. Nothing changes the land. Nothing changes the shape of the earth, other than unless we're talking about unless we're talking about era-long epochs, when of course tectonic plate activity. That's what I'm talking about. The only thing that really changes the land realistically is tectonic plate activity, which of course is on a scale of millions of years. But ultimately, in human history, the only thing that changes is humanity drawing lines, arbitrary lines on maps, which unfortunately are usually drawn through violence. And as you say, history is geography on wheels. So we are at, James, I think as we've discussed, we believe we are at one of those junctures in time, one of those nexus points in time, where indeed arbitrary lines can be drawn on a map. We are at a point now where situation on the ground has changed politically between these two nations, and indeed we think that new lines can be drawn. Now is the time. As you say, Sikhs have given India's subcontinent a peaceful Raj rule in the past, so why not? Let's redraw these lines on this map. Now is the time to create this buffer state. So again, James, I think even as Harjinder says, history is geography on wheels. I think that explains everything perfectly, how things can evolve through time.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that it's been less than 100 years since they drew those lines in 1947. So, why not make some adjustments now and really improve the lives of everybody in the region?
Exactly, that's a key point. It's India and Pakistan are young countries. They are literally less than 100 years old. They are desperately young countries. There is no reason, therefore, there is no reasonable argument to go against this whole concept, saying, look, India is so young anyway, what's redrawing a new map? It's only changing a few decades of existence, so why not? So I think, that, again, a very valid argument. And Mohsing actually
that should have been done in 1947 to begin with, Angus.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right there, James. I think, obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, but had those people in the late 1940s understood what would evolve, and unfortunately the British pulled out in such a rush, they just drew this line pretty arbitrarily across the map. Had they known and really foreseen what could have happened, yes, of course it makes sense, apart from the fact that the Sikhs were promised at the time their own homeland. But yes, how logical it would have been with the benefit of hindsight, let's just create another strip of land, give it to the Sikh nation, that would keep those two warring nations apart forevermore. So, but Mohsing says, again, India will never have peace. Again, it is a perpetual problem. But I think, what you said, if Khalistan happens, India will just go round Khalistan through Rajasthan in the south, Gujarat in the south, to then go fight Pakistan. But what I would say to you, Mohsing, is look at the map that has actually been created by the Khalistan Caucus Foundation. And I think, James, you and I have talked about Khalistan should be the Punjab as it stands now. Actually, I think we are wrong, and I think what events have proven is, and as Mohsing actually points out, look, if we just establish Khalistan as the Punjab, then it's not going to solve this problem, because as Mohsing rightly says, all India are going to do is just go round. They'll just go round to the south and go through Gujarat or Rajasthan to cross the border into Pakistan. So ultimately, it doesn't solve the problem. So I think Mohsing, what the Caucus Foundation, the Khalistan Foundation, have actually come up with is this redrawn map, which actually extends Khalistan not just to include present-day Punjab, but also goes all the way up to Ladakh, to the Chinese border, all the way down through Gujarat to the Indian Ocean. So it is a complete strip of land. So it is that impenetrable barrier to avoid exactly what you point out, is that India would just go around, James. So I think even though it is a very ambitious aspiration to have this long strip instead of just the Punjab itself, I think in the light of current events, it now is justified.
Well, and it would be beautiful to see them have the ability to have shipping ports as well, to not be landlocked. So that would be a major benefit to Khalistan. But again, at the end of the day, I think that if they can show leadership and advancement of a peaceful region through that section, even known as Khalistan, I think that could reach out to other communities and other states along the border. So, it's not a one solution fits all, but it is definitely moving in the right direction should Khalistan be formed, and when it is.
Yeah, and I think, James, you actually bring out a very, very important, pertinent point there. Of course, Khalistan, with a seaport on the Indian Ocean, for its continued existence, its survival, and of course its success, particularly commercially speaking, it does need access to a port on the Indian Ocean that would provide that hugely important, significant, strategic, logistical capability to export and import via the sea. So yes, indeed, that stretching down to the Indian Ocean would ensure that ability to be a commercial success going forward. So yeah, a very big point there. And Avtar Dhillon signs us off by saying, like they say, strike while the iron is hot. And as you say, have a good weekend, mate. Nice and sunny here in Coventry, up in the Midlands of the UK. Well, indeed, it's been a lovely sunny day, or in fact, a lovely sunny week here in the UK on a very rare occasion, James. So I'm delighted to say that we in the UK have been, despite my pale pallor, we have been enjoying the sunshine. Has it been the same in Canada, James?
It has been beautiful. So I'm glad to see that I'm not the only one that's peeling along the hairline as it gets thinner. You know, that bit of scalp there has always been protected by hair, but it seems to be disappearing as I get older, and now it's replaced by sunburn.
Indeed. Keep wearing that hat, and a big hello to our UK community, particularly you guys up in the Midlands, and indeed to Abdar in Coventry.
Absolutely.
Thanks for your continued support and loyalty, and likewise to all our audience. Thank you for your continued loyalty to the programme. We do appreciate it. Do spread the word, of course. We are trying to get the word out to a wider audience, and particularly if you're watching us from the Punjab in India or other parts of India, tell your fellows across India, use VPNs, change your settings on YouTube to a different nation. You can then watch us. Would love to increase our audience within India, because of course that's where we have the biggest impact. That's where we do need to get the message of the truth out about what is really going on the ground. But in the meantime, we will draw perspectives to close for another day. Thanks very much for your for the audience, for your continued support. Don't forget to keep those comments coming in. Loads of great comments. Do keep them coming in. And don't forget you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com if there's any you'd like to bring to our attention, as many of you have indeed been doing so. So thank you for that. In the meantime, you have been watching Perspectives. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.